soon as we get the green light, we'll go. We're good? All right, excellent. Thank you, Corey. We will call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone to our January 23rd, 2023 Policy Committee meeting. Tracy, if you don't mind doing the roll call?
Mrs. Hudson?
Yes, present.
Mrs. Davis?
Present.
All right. We will dive right back in, I believe, to where we left off last meeting. I think that we didn't have a ton of changes, but we started with, just to make sure we're all on the same page, we started with Shaker Heights' current policy related to naming rights and started to make changes to the same. I want to make a recommendation that we just, similar to Upper Arlington and other districts that we see that have policies like Upper Arlington, that we just call it naming rights and avoid use of the term sponsorship, so that we avoid confusion and that this is just a policy related to naming facilities.
Absolutely.
You're okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So I will make that, I guess we can talk about whether or not we need to include donor gifts in there, but I don't think we do.
I don't think we do.
We have that in our separate policy, right? Okay, so this is just naming rights.
Right. Because those things will fall under that category at times,
Exactly,
but not all the time.
exactly. So do we want to call it naming of district facilities, similar to Upper Arlington from a title standpoint? And
Is it just facilities? I mean, is it?
I don't know.
You think
saw
of a
a policy
facility.
that had trash cans on it, so
Right,
you never know. We can just call it naming rights. Let's just leave it there. I mean, it covers. We
Yeah.
don't have to get into those
I don't think so.
nitty-gritty details from a titling standpoint. Along those lines then, in the second paragraph, we can strike the term sponsorship and so it'll just say naming rights for district properties, facilities, and programs. Okay,
I do have one change before you
get there?
go into in the first paragraph, you cross out Shaker Heights and just put Board of Education, but I would put Worthington. Sometimes when I look up policies, it will print out for me, I'll print it out, and it doesn't say and I'm like, what district was that? And so to have it say Worthington in the beginning.
The only reason I did not is so that we're consistent throughout our policies. So that was
Oh,
one thing that I
okay.
did, was I went back and looked at how we refer to ourselves throughout our policies.
Oh, okay.
And I'm almost positive, I know I looked up district, I'm almost positive I looked up Board of Education. I can put a little question mark by there, but I would
Okay.
just want us to be consistent throughout as we refer to ourselves in our other policies.
Do we know why we do that? I'm just curious.
I'm
there a
sure it
reason?
most definitely predates me.
I didn't know if Randy would know. No.
I think it's just a Neola recommendation because it's within our policy manual. So
Okay.
they just, anytime the district is referenced or the board is referenced, it's included in the bylaws, I think, with the definitions of who that is.
Okay.
So just simplifies it.
Okay. Just in printing it off. It
Yep,
just-
yep. Yeah, I get
You
it.
do lose that a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
it mentions Worthington later on, but
Right.
anyways, okay.
Okay, so then, but I did put a question mark there, Kelly, and I'll check it just to make sure that I'm not remembering that that's how we refer to ourselves in other policies. Second full paragraph, I just removed the references to sponsorship or sponsorship or, in addition to what we have here. I'll just shoot the last section, just say all naming rights. Yeah, okay. And I have a problem with, it's not that I have a problem with, capitalized terms should not be capitalized unless they're defined. A term should not be capitalized unless they're defined. And they do have, I feel a little ignorant here, but instead of having it separately defined, it's just defined right there in that second paragraph. So it can stay capitalized. I just want you guys to know that I realized that after I was searching high and low within their policies for like a definition section, they just incorporated it right there. Any issues with that particular with how they've defined it or how we have it defined now there in that second paragraph.
Oh, no, I don't have any issue with that.
Okay. So I'll just make a note to go through the sections we've already gone through and look for any other references to sponsorship, removing the same.
Through the entire policy?
At least through the portions that we have previously reviewed. I mean, obviously, we could do so here too. And Kelly, I was wrong. We can leave the two types there because one's in consideration, and so that financial consideration can be from an individual, or it can be from a corporation. So I think, yeah, we could just leave that as is.
So in that second paragraph, are we keeping all sponsorships that include naming rights shall be approved by the board? Do we
Yes.
need that sentence?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Why are we singling out
I wouldn't,
sponsorships?
no, I'm sorry. I removed sponsorship that include. So it just says all naming rights shall be
Okay.
approved by the board.
I
Sorry.
heard you say that to Randy. Okay.
You're good, you're good. Per our prior discussion, in the section entitled Naming Rights and Recognition, I pulled over that language that we liked from Upper Arlington, and tweaked it just at the very beginning to make it flow with the text that was already in this section. I will share with you that I did reach out to Lori Trent, who's the current president. Their policy predates her, and so she was not aware of how they landed on the 5-year, but kindly offered to look into it. So that's to be determined. I think you referenced previously, Randy, that it's just probably a nice cooling off period, right? And not cooling off period is probably not the right appropriate terminology, but it lets things settle, emotions settle, and then determine if that's really the right move.
Is it the highlighted section that you're referring to?
Yes.
So my question with that is, I know we talked about it last time, is where do we end with policy and administrative guidelines begin? Are those details that need to be in our policy, or are they details that need to be in administrative guidelines?
No clear distinction on that. There's not like a clear, this is where it ends and this is where it begins. I personally try to think of it as often as if I were someone who were looking this up, what are the key terms that I would want to ensure were available to someone who was researching what are the options here. Okay. So given that this is one that is meant to address potentially a conversation that could be proposed during a highly emotional stage, I would think that we would want to go ahead and have it in here so that it was just upfront already out there and individuals could be made aware of it versus getting someone who's in a state of grief very excited about something they think they could do based on the policy as they see it that's available to them, and then to learn that it's not something that they can do because they're not past that 5-year window.
Okay. And then, I mean, I know we talked about this before, and I even said I like the time frame. So if we're looking at things that we're doing now with regards to Thomas and Kilbourne, this means that anytime we have to look 5 years back, right?
With regards to if it were naming rights related to someone who is deceased or in honor or recognition of someone who was at one point employed. I would think so, yeah.
Okay.
Do you agree? Does that sound right to you as well?
I don't know. Like, I've seen other things that say case by case, and that, I don't know if that is the better way to go or not. I don't know if we can take a minute and go, okay, it's 2023. who has passed away or left our district in the last 5 years that we would make an exception for, and maybe we wouldn't. And so we'll feel comfortable with saying a
5
set
years.
time frame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will tell you personally, I like having a set amount, and for whatever reason, in my head, I was thinking maybe it could be 3 years versus 5 years.
It could be, say it
3
again.
years
Okay.
versus 5 years. If I think about, obviously, well, at least when you're talking about someone who is deceased, the process of grieving is different for every individual.
Absolutely.
And I personally feel like 3 years is still a good amount of time in which you would be grounded to make a sound decision if you wanted to go that route. But I don't feel strongly between 3 years and 5 years, and so I'm glad to open it up for conversation.
I mean, do you think it needs to be a specified year? Randy, do you think it needs to be a specified year? I'm just asking.
Yeah, I think,
don't
so
know.
two things. I appreciate the fact that you're looking for flexibility and looking for where policy stops and administrative guidelines pick up, because typically that helps the administration implement policy if there's some flexibility. What's highlighted here in yellow, I think actually helps all of us
Okay.
because of whether it's 3 or 5, doesn't matter to me. But I think, and in an emergency situation, if we needed to modify that, it could be done by modifying the policy.
Okay.
But for the most part, it just gives us some guidelines and some guardrails in dealing with these issues. So I actually like what's in yellow, whether
Okay.
you change it to 3 or 5, no preference. We haven't dealt with it recently.
Okay. Well, then I think we could, if you say 3, I mean, I don't have a preference, but 3 or 5, if there could be some modification if necessary.
So why don't we draft it as, or even just put a note in there for when we take it to our peers?
Okay.
So that we open it up for discussion as to whether or not we feel like that's the right time frame.
Okay.
Okay. And so I think that takes us to granting naming rights, and that's where we were that's the section that we left off at the last meeting. Okay. So I'll give everyone a moment to review it again, and then we can talk through any proposed changes. I will tell you then there's lowercase naming rights right here. So we will just be consistent as to whether we capitalize it or not. So, Randy, there's one section in this particular provision that I actually think is a great example of, does this really belong here, or should it be more in administrative guidelines? And that is, it requires, this particular version requires signage to be approved by the board, and that just seems like overkill to me and something that I would much rather put in the hands of the administration to execute. Okay,
I would change board.
to superintendent. I think that's a great, and then everything within our policy, Kelly says that if it's referenced to the superintendent, somewhere within our policy, I know it says basically he has the right to delegate that. So it's not like we're putting Trent on the hook for that. Or his, yeah.
There is, so there's a policy another policy that I was looking at this weekend,
Yeah.
and very similar to Shaker. And one little line that it says, and I'm trying to figure out where to put it in here. This section does mention, I had it and then I lost it. Hold on. This is where I think I need my bifocals.
You're not alone.
Oh, where it says the granting of naming rights must always be consistent with the district's vision, mission, and shared purpose. This sentence expands that a little bit, where it says the district recognizes that the official names of its facilities are vital to their public image. I just liked that.
I like that too.
And that gives a reason to why it needs to be consistent.
Why don't we put that do you want to put that at the beginning of that sentence?
Yes.
Okay, do you want to just read it to me again? And then if need be, I'll have you just email it to me, but go ahead.
Yes, it says the district recognizes that the official names of its facilities are vital to, I don't know if it should say their public image. Their public image. It's the district, it should be its public image.
It's public image, yeah. Okay, we could state, I like that, and then.
And that's one sentence, and then it says, therefore, granting of naming rights
Great.
must always be consistent.
Great,
in that sentence.
I like that a lot.
I just like that.
So that change you had, and then the change that I referenced, we'll change it from the board to superintendent, and then obviously consistent in capitalization of naming rights. Randy, TJ, anything from your side on that particular section?
I don't know if it's that particular section, but one thing I was noting was in consideration, it's pretty specific that the contract itself will determine the length of time that the facility is to be named. But on the last page, it says termination of naming rights. Should we specify that that section doesn't refer to in consideration, it only refers to in recognition? Because I'm not sure which, on page 2 and on page 3, which one of those apply to both and which one of those apply only to naming rights in recognition. Because I don't believe that the termination would be specific in the contract if it was in consideration of a donation. But if we named it after a person because of their contribution, the only reason that would not be is if it was terminated by one of those or the building was torn down.
Okay,
And then maybe if we do that, maybe we can put a statement about honoring, which will help take care of some of the concerns that were brought forth by community members at our last meeting. So if you do have a facility that's being torn down and it's
Here's
currently named, here's how the board would handle that. So that it's, I don't know, just kind of wrapping that all together.
no, it makes sense. I will tell you that the research that I did in this area, just about every article and presentation and guidance I saw in this area is that there's a strong recommendation not to give naming rights in perpetuity. So because I found all of this because I was looking for how do we handle the fact that we have arguably, issues in that space. So I think we have to make a decision as to whether or not we continue to do that. Or if we cap it there was one presentation that I read or that I saw that was, cap it at 50 years, or do we put a certain number of years on the maximum? If we don't, and we do continue, we do allow for in perpetuity, then I think your recommendation is a very good one, Randy, in that we articulate that one that's given, a naming right that's given in recognition for, you gotta be careful with because I almost said for contributions, and then I didn't want to use the same verbiage or as, for consideration. So one that's given in recognition, if we wanted to allow that to be in perpetuity, that we would articulate that, and I'm just trying to make sure that I'm catching what you said, Randy, that it would still terminate upon demolition of the building, but when that demolition occurs, it would transition to, and we would have like an alternative naming scheme essentially, and that would happen upon every demolition. So at some point, you wouldn't have 3 names associated. Like if it were demolished again, then that first one would come off, and then you would have the, in honor of language that you referenced. Am I following your recommendation?
Yeah, and
Okay.
it may be worth repeating that naming rights given in consideration would be terminated based on the agreement. Naming rights given in recognition would, if you want to put a specific year, that would be fine. But I do think if a facility's torn down, it would be nice to have a guide for future boards on how to handle that, because we could be dealing with that at elementary schools.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm comfortable wherever we land. This is not an easy thing for us to navigate. When something is done in recognition of, as we have currently connected to our facilities, obviously those are things that are done because of significant contributions to our school or in our community. So what would you think, Kelly, about drafting it just along the lines of Randy said, which is essentially that it survives until the demolition of that building, and then upon demolition of that building, the next structure would be, we'll have to figure out what that naming convention looks like. And then we specify if the building were to be demolished again, then that's when the rights go away.
No, I like that, spelling that out. And I think it's, of the different things that I read, that's very consistent
Great.
with once you demolish something or it's relocated or whatever.
Yeah, I saw several references to demolition as well, and just honestly not granting in perpetuity, but we're there. So, but when we carve out a way to honor and a way to make it clear how we navigate this going forward. Randy, was there a particular naming convention that you were thinking along those lines? Like, let's use the, is it the auditorium at Thomas right now? Let's use that as an example. Like, how would we potentially structure the naming?
Yeah, I think if this is the direction we're going, the auditorium could be renamed since it's going to be a completely new facility. But that particular feature of our school was named after someone, so how do we honor that person moving forward appropriately?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that was kind of the goal of our speakers at the last meeting, was making sure that we honored that history and did it in a respectful way, and that we communicated that clearly. So if we can wrap that all up into this policy, I think that answers future questions.
Okay.
And so you would think that goes under policy and not guidelines?
Only in that it spells it out and
Okay.
it formalizes it. And it still gives the district flexibility in how you would memorialize previous names.
Okay.
Would it be a plaque? Would it be, there's lots of different ways, but it doesn't disappear. It's just the name may change because the facility is completely new.
So we just have to put our thinking hats on at how we structure.
What if under that sentence, once a facility has been officially named, it shall not be renamed except for demolition of facility, expiration of agreement, or other reasons, compelling reasons by the board. And then you can go into, upon demolition of a facility, something to the effect the board will work with management to honor the past name in concert with the new name. You know what I mean? Like, spell that out somehow.
Meaning that we don't have to get to the nitty-gritty of exactly how the
No, you're
naming
just- I think
convention
to
is going
Randy's
to
point, you're
be,
just- Yeah.
but you're acknowledging the fact that upon demolition, I would say upon demolition, the preceding, so that it's very clear, the immediately preceding naming will continue to be honored. We'll figure
Some
out,
manner.
yeah, exactly. But giving that, I hear you, giving that flexibility, but I do think it's important that we don't set the district up for, 4 or 5
domino
or even
effect.
3, yeah. Okay, I think we're all on the same page, which is great. We'll just have to figure out
The wording.
the verbiage, exactly. Anything else in granting naming rights? Okay. Personal names, why don't we look at that section then next? So I feel like, I think it's UA's is a little more explicit about the terms under which it can be revoked. So I'm going to look really quickly to that. It's basically, it's a moral clause, so that if you have someone who acts immorally, maybe it wasn't UA. Do you recall what I'm, yeah, but do you recall let me see if I could find it elsewhere. And if I can't, then I'll just insert it afterwards and share it in the next draft. But do we all recall what I'm talking about? Basically, if something happens, so,
You mean
I'm-
after it's already been named?
exactly, yes. So something unfavorable happens.
One thing, there's the second to last sentence that says facilities may be named after major contributors to the district. That sentence feels very out of place. I don't know.
I agree. That's what I thought. I thought it should just be part of the first sentence.
Right. That's the only issue I have with this one.
I don't have any problems deleting that sentence at all. It's already conveyed through the other language in that paragraph.
Okay.
So I'm just going to make a note to look for sample language relating to, if something extremely unfavorable were to happen, giving us the right to take action.
Okay.
So we can move down to company, group, or product names. It's interesting, the right to revoke exists there, but not elsewhere.
This is where I would say, like, I assume whatever we do will run by legal.
Council.
Like, it seems like UA made a very strong effort to outline things, whereas this policy just says basically maintain exemplary record and positive public image.
Yeah,
That may leave you open, I guess, to.
I don't think there's any reason. It's funny, TJ, you reference that because I was looking at that specific section of the UA policy where they go into all of the different, it's essentially a bunch of no's, right? We're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. Like one of them being no building, portion of a building, maybe named to promote any specific religion or religious, ethnic or racial group or political candidate. Like, I don't see there's any reason why we can't take this section and include it in here. So we can have the general guidelines, then we can include the outline of the things we know we won't do, and combine the two of them.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, we're good. So we're aligned.
Wheels are turning.
So as soon as we get through this, we only have a few more sections. Then let's turn to UA. Let's look at those specific situations that they outline that I agree with you, TJ, I think are favorable to include in there. And let's figure out which ones, or if there are any that we feel like are already accounted for in the language of the draft policy. Does that sound okay? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here, it's your guys' decision on what you want to include. I just think
But we value
positive public image isn't open to debate.
Absolutely.
That might leave the board.
This is more, definitely more explicit. This being the UA policy is definitely more explicit, and there's no reason. There's nothing in there's. I don't think there's anything in here that anyone would take issue with. I think we spell it out. It's favorable to do so, so that it doesn't leave it to interpretation. So I actually think we would probably include it right there after we've got personal names. We could even combine those two sections, personal names. We can just, anyway, we could leave them separate, whatever. But right after that, we could include the section from the UA policy where we spell out in more detail. It's really a bunch of things that won't be done.
Okay. I'm going to look at how you put that in there. I just have to.
Yeah, I think it.
I don't know why it's giving me pause and I can't. So sorry.
You're
Find the
fine.
words just to say why.
I think I would probably just entitle it like additional guidelines, and because it says, in addition to the foregoing, the Board of Education will apply the following guidelines in considering naming requests. And then it goes, into detail. So I'll throw it in there and then we can decide if
Okay.
we need to tweak how, so that it flows with the rest of the policy. So the next section is pretty simple. It's basically that you can't transfer naming rights.
Right.
I will tell you that I don't know that this needs to be in our policy. It could just be in the contracts. I don't feel strongly about it. I think it's not something that's commonly done, or most people would even think applies to a naming right.
Yeah.
So I don't
They
feel.
say that was my grandfather, and now that's me.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just not something that's common. So I would be comfortable removing this particular section and just putting it in our contract. But I'm open to discussion on that.
I don't feel strongly either way.
Okay. Right to govern use then is the next section. Again, I feel like this is a no-brainer. Just because you name something doesn't mean you have the right to. And I would assume it's going to be in the contract. I don't necessarily know that it needs to be in our policy. But I don't, again, feel strongly about it. So,
I would leave it.
okay.
But is this, Randy, where you go to, like, your name, you've talked about naming a facility, but those funds that come out of the naming rights can go to another. So I do kind of think that needs to be outlined, just so people are aware.
So we could expand on it then. So if we want to, right to govern use, if we want to include policy, the facility and how the funds are used. Okay.
When you talk about people looking at policy and seeing, will I or won't I do this?
Mhm.
Or am I eligible? I think
I feel
this
like
is a
that's
key,
good.
because I think that's a key part of what we've discussed so far.
Okay. And then we get into the termination provisions. And so this is where TJ, you had made the recommendation that essentially on that we,
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think you expand on that. As to Randy's point, you could read that either way. Like, you don't define naming in consideration versus naming in recognition. And when they this gives the appearance that they're all, never to be renamed. I think you define, it shall not be renamed except for demolition of the facility, expiration of agreement, or other compelling reasons to be determined by the board.
yeah, I think that's a great,
If that's where the board wants to land on that.
no, I think that's a great recommendation.
Or if they, if the rest of the board thinks 50 year, you could alter it at that point.
Sure.
Wherever you want to.
Okay. Oh, this is the provision I was looking for earlier. We got there. Yep,
And
yep.
I was like, oh, this is what she was talking about.
And I don't see any
I-
issues with the next two. Go ahead, Callie.
It says termination by the school.
No, my district.
Yeah.
Good catch. All right. If we're comfortable with the changes that we've talked about here, then can we take a moment to look at Upper Arlington's 7250 and specifically the guidelines that it indicates that it spells out when considering naming requests?
The in addition part?
Yes. And then just let me know I guess I would just say, just let me know if you feel like any of them don't apply.
Like, yeah, before you move on, I would just tell you the second to last sentence there, it says Board of School Directors. That should be Board of Education.
Thank you.
Thanks, TJ.
Makes me feel like I should just contact someone up there and say, by the way, someone found an error in one of our
Yes.
policies. Okay, so yeah, let me know in 7250 if there's anything here that I'm going to take a moment to read through it as well. We feel like that should not apply.
And I don't know if it would help or make things more complicated, but the way I envisioned this with naming rights, if the district rolled this campaign out in correlation with our high school rebuilds, there could be a committee that would accept applications and run through the criteria, whatever is established, and either greenlight it or not, and then make that recommendation to the board. But then there would be a filter before the board, so that the board doesn't have to say no to something obvious like what, you pick, whatever it is.
Yeah,
But
Marlboro.
yeah. So, we wouldn't have to define the committee. The committee could be part of the administrative guidelines, but at least in this initial phase where we're actually going through this campaign, I think having a committee that could be made up of part employees, part community members to say, this meets the criteria well enough to take it to the board or not, that it might help the board. But on the other hand, I don't want to complicate it either.
No,
So it's just,
I feel like that's what I'm aligned with you. I feel like I don't
And
know
I
if it
think
was
that's pretty
in,
consistent.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I've
Yeah.
seen that. I think, Shaker Heights in their FF, I don't know what policy that is, but naming new facilities, it says the superintendent to establish a committee. I read it in some, I think.
I
it's
I
pretty
feel like we
consistent.
read it in another one
Yeah.
too. Good. So I will tell you, Kelly, the only ones that have been making me scratch my head are C and D, and I'm sure that people had scenarios that created C and D. I just don't know what they are. The other ones make complete sense to me. C and D, I read them and I'm like, what would that be?
Well, yeah. How would you define that? The only thing about E was that I feel like we've already said that, kind of. I mean, this spells it out a little bit more.
Yeah, which section was that in? The granting of naming rights. I think maybe that's where we put these additional, and we just put it all within that paragraph. I mean, within that section.
Yeah, that
Just
makes sense.
expand that section.
I just don't,
Yeah, I agree with you. We've already stated that.
is this a situation, having never written policy before, it's just the two of us, is this a situation where, again, we add this with a note and take it to the full board to see what their perspective would be?
Yeah, we can do so. Absolutely. Meaning the D and the E where I'm scratching my head going.
The
what-
C and D,
what-
yeah.
Or the C and D, yeah, okay.
do you read political candidate to mean actively campaigning? Or do you read that to mean politician? Like if a mayor or a governor or,
I really read it to be an actively campaigning political candidate. Like I could think of like school districts where, like you said, if there's someone who a graduate goes on to become president.
Right.
That's someone who's held a political office, and we would want the
Right.
ability to be able to recognize them.
Yeah, we're just going to avoid campaigns in which a facility is named after an active or a current political candidate.
Yes,
But if they're a retired mayor of a city or,
correct. Okay. Would we want to spell out then?
Can you just add the word active?
Active, and do we want to say active political candidate, or do we want to say active politician? Or someone actively holding a political office?
So I think of our city treasurer. That was the city treasurer forever. City auditor, Hugh Dorian. And the things were named after him as he was actively the city auditor, because he was just so well respected. And so I don't know that you want to close that if someone is in a position for a long period of time
Mhm.
like that. I don't know that you want to close it off necessarily.
I don't know that we do either. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't I just include the term active before political candidate?
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, the full board may say,
Great.
we don't need to spell it out in this way.
Okay.
Wouldn't that be inherent in the term candidate though? Like what? You're now a board member, you're not a political candidate anymore. You know what I mean? Candidate implies that.
I think some people would disagree with that.
I was just saying.
I don't know.
I know a person that would disagree with that.
Good. We're in good shape.
Yeah.
So I will commit to, because we have a long board meeting tonight, although we have a little bit of time now, I'll see if I can make these changes and just circulate it right now. Yeah, because otherwise it'll be who knows after tomorrow, because we have a late night tonight. Good. And then, Kelly, at tonight's meeting, are we both aligned that we need to share that in addition to the policy, we'll need a resolution for the legacy fund, and that's in order to appropriately note the segregation from the general operating funds for the capital project. And TJ, if there are questions related to that, if you don't mind, I will punt those to you.
Sure.
And then we'll obviously need to review the policy, which we could do the first reading at the next meeting, if everyone's comfortable with that. And that's it, correct?
yeah. And then TJ, you and I should try to get together with a consultant.
Okay, and Kelly, you're welcome to
Yeah.
join that too.
Yeah.
And you two are welcome to do that as well. However, I will help however I can. Okay, so great. So that takes care of item 2 on our agenda. I will move to approve the minutes from our January 13th, 2023 Policy Committee meeting.
Second,
Mrs. Hudson?
Yes,
Mrs. Davis?
yes.
and I will motion to adjourn.
Second,
Mrs. Hudson?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
yes.
Wonderful. Thanks for a great meeting, everyone.